So 30 years ago, on 20 April 94, China became the 77th country to go online and connecting with the global internet. And that was a time of blooming globalization in which West and we East were becoming deeply intertwined by technological development. And that reinforced the trend of global interdependence in terms of trade, finance, global value chains that had been already identified in the 70s by Joseph Nye and Professor Kyo Hein. So we are here today to, first of all, to celebrate this remarkable event. It represents the opportunity to include not only a significant part of the global population, 1.4 billion people to be more exact, online, but also it's an opportunity for the world to have access to the torrent of innovation and that has been produced by this incredibly rich society and business sector. On the flip side, the internet has also transformed China and Chinese society a lot, and we will hear a little bit more about that in our discussion today. I would even dare to say that technological progress has become intimately correlated with China's goal of modernization, and that displays of this technological prowess have become points of national pride and real symbols of this modern China today. But the way that China relates to the digital world and to the West has also changed too. China is not just a consumer of a Western technology anymore, but it's also a global exporter. And the presence of China is considerably felt today in all internet layers, from telecommunications to standards, to applications, and increasingly in regulation as well. And this affects the distribution of global power. More recently, we saw that telecommunications and mobile technology have become well-established fields of geopolitical rivalry and competition between our two big global powerhouses in the digital realm today, the US and China. And this dispute is somehow spreading through the vast array of so-called critical emerging technologies, which include artificial intelligence today. So as these tensions rises, measures have been put perhaps by both sides here to restrict access to each other's digital markets. And we're going to explore a little bit more about the consequences of that on digital interdependence and on digital governance more generally. So a lot of thought-provoking questions today, and I'm really happy that we have put together an amazing panel to discuss these questions. We will have with us Jovan Kurbalia, who is director of Diplo and head of the Geneva Internet Platform. We have a Professor Li Xiaodong. He's the founder and the chief executive officer of Fuxi Institution, and he's also a professor at Tsinghua University. We'll have Professor Liu Hao. He's executive chair of the School of Global Governance in the Beijing Institute of Technology. Professor Rogier Kremers, he's assistant professor and lecturer in modern Chinese studies at the Leiden University, and Sorina Teleano, who is director of knowledge at Diplo. I must say that we are also very grateful for receiving two very special messages with reflections about this 30-year anniversary and wishing us a good seminar today. We received messages from Madame Hu Qiheng, China's internet pioneer and global connector. We could consider her the mother of the Chinese internet, and Vint Cerf, who is a vice president and chief internet evangelist at Google and one of the fathers of the internet. So I would like to invite you to please go online and take a look at this full context of these messages, and we will leave the link to the page where you can find these messages in the chat. Our discussion will take place as well in the chat. The chat discussion will be moderated by my colleague, Sonia Herring, and she's Digital Media and Communications Editor at Diplo. And this is a very short session, so questions will be forwarded via chat only. Sonia will collect them and forward the questions at the end. This also means, because we don't have much time, that I will need to be a little bit strict with time, so I apologize for interrupting any of the speakers in advance if I have to. And we have a hard stop in 1 hour. So I would like to go down directly to the first round of questions that we have for discussion today. In this first block of questions, we'll try to look back at this past 30 years, and I will invite Professor Jovan Kurbalia and Liu Hao to share their reflections. We have some questions in this block. First of all, what are some of the factors that help to explain China's rapid global digital development? How connecting to the internet has transformed China itself? And how has China's technological, economic, political presence in the digital landscape influenced the development of the internet? So we have a question at different levels: world, China, internet. What has changed in this last year? So to start, I will give the floor to Jovan. Please go, Jovan, go ahead.
Thank you, Marilia. I'm really honored to address today's meeting, and congratulations to our Chinese colleagues. And I would say to all of us, because this is the remarkable event of the global relevance. I'm connecting from Dublin, where I just delivered a keynote address on the conference on AI and religion. And in the preparation for this event, I was asking myself about both deeper historical reasons for success of internet in China and possible indications about the future. And I came to the interesting fact that when Deng Xiaoping, father of the opening of China in 80s, decided to move to shift the promote opening, one of the most important book which was translated in Chinese was Max Weber's book on Protestant ethic and the spirit of the capitalism. Therefore, he understood very early that it's not just opening, taking technology, but also understanding context in which this technology is developed. And this is a fascinating artifact. It was translated, and it was almost compulsory reading for all people involved in this transformation. And that book explains the main elements of the modernization, industrialization in Western society. Max Weber argued for the Protestant ethic to be underlying behind that, and adoption in the Chinese context through industrialization, modernization prior to the 80s and the Deng Xiaoping's opening, but also inspiring this change. That was an interesting must reading and interesting connection. The second, let's say, historical moment was 2004, where together with Madame Hu Qinghui, who sent the message, I was member of the working group on internet governance. And I realized at that point the really strong push towards convergence and sharing understandings of the internet, with how internet should be governed, with all specificities which we shouldn't shy away, and differences in that process. And it was then my book was translated, and really continuous exchange with Madame Hu started on many issues, including controversial issues. And it was a fascinating friendship, which I cherish a lot. And in these two elements, let's say deep thinking, you can find ingredients for the future where not only on technologies, on data, on AI, on whatever we use, but in deeper understanding, societal, cultural understandings, we can build regulation of AI, use of AI and other tools. And all sides in this discussion, we usually simplify it to the United States and China, which is the most prominent, but I would say other societies should contribute to it. Definitely from China, through Taoism, to Confucianism, to deeper thinking from European side, from the antique thinking, from Judeo-Christian tradition, but also Ubuntu civilization from Africa and other places. Therefore, that's what Deng Xiaoping started with the book, Max Weber's book, and basically paved the way for the modernization and digitalization, an important agent of it, should continue. We have to be aware of differences, not shy away from controversies, but also look for some sort of common and shared, if I can call it, operating system when it comes to values, philosophy, and benefits that we are gaining from technology.
Thank you. Thank you very much for sharing these reflections, Jovan. And I would like to come back to them towards the end when we think about the commonalities that we have as countries that want to build the internet together. But let me pass directly, mindful of time, to Professor Liu Hao for him to share his reflections.
Thank you, Mariela. I would like to start with the history to follow the practice of Yuban. So, you know, China is a country have a long history, but unfortunately, in the 20th century, China suffered a lot. So, for such a sharper comparison, makes every Chinese people want to have a faster development. So, the Chinese people, we don't sleep. We try to grab any opportunity to develop faster. I think this is quite important reason for the faster development in the past 30 decades for the internet and the digital development. Secondly, that China has a strong central government, and this government has also additional ways of policy making to promote and support the digital development. This is the second reason. And thirdly, the market dynamics and the size of market. The massive domestic market of China provide a vast opportunity for the scale and growth. So it's for such a market, big market, benefit and also attract both domestic and international investment. And the fourth factors for the development in the past 3 decades was technology innovation and adoption. At the beginning, especially for the first and second generation of telecommunication, China is transplanting and adoption roles of product and technology innovated in Europe and America. In the third and fourth generation, China is engaged in the innovation already. And when we come to the 5G, China became the main player and are highly connected with the world innovation ecosystem. The last reason is that the international collaboration, even sometimes disrupted or going parallel with the roles of conflict. As globalization increased, so did the flow of technology and ideas. So such international collaboration benefits a lot for the faster development of China. Well, for the second question, which connecting to the how that the global connection changed the development of China, I think the first, the political system with easy, cheaper internet connection, almost every part of the world of China have access to the democratic system. So we are really come to a new stage of a democratic system. And this also help the government to improve its governance. So this is the political influence. Secondly, economic growth. The internet had been a powerful engine for the economic development and contributing to the digital transformation that impacts very aspects of the Chinese economy. The third, because I'm working in a university, I feel the big influence of the internet to the education and the society. Now in China, the students, the professors are well connected with the international community. We don't just reflect or learn roles of knowledge, roles of experience in China, but every part of the world. Fourth is a cultural exchange. The rise of the internet has transformed the China media landscape, reducing the influence of a traditional mass media and giving rise to a digital media platform. The fifth are the innovation and the technology. As I had mentioned, China started from adoption of the technology, moved to the engaging and then contributing to the global innovation of the science, technology, and engineering. The last question is how that China's development influence the world. I think I just wanted to address the following three. First is economic impact. The integration of the internet into China's economic strategy has significantly boosted its GDP with a notable impact on the global market. So China's digital economy has been a major growth driver for the world economy, even during the pandemic season. This is the first. And secondly, is the technological innovation and standards. China has played a pivotal role in shaping global technology standards through its sum of advancement in digital technology. This influence extends from telecommunication equipment to newer areas like Yuven just mentioned, the 5G communication, the digital commerce, and also the AI. Last one is the global digital influence. Through the initiative like the Digital Silk Road, China has extended its digital infrastructure to developing countries, influencing their digital landscape and enhancing its global outreach. So I don't want to say that this is a China-centric. No, it is a China-connected digital network. I will stop here, and I will be happy to join the later discussion.
Thank you very much, Professor Liu Hao. You covered a lot of ground in your reply. Thank you for that. And I particularly like how you emphasize the role of collaboration and how it benefited China. And I would just emphasize that it benefited the West. So this interplay and this interchange between China and the West has also provided higher than average returns to early investments in telecommunications, which provided the capital and the resources to develop much of the technology in the West as well. And I really like the point that you made on how China progressed as a developing country. I think that this is the path that many other developing countries would like to follow in terms of acquiring technology, but also becoming producers of this technology. So in that sense, there's a lot to study in the Chinese model as well. Thank you very much for this first round. I would like to pass directly to the second round, in which we will examine more in detail some present trends that we can find in China's engagement with global digital policy more specifically. In this second round, I will call Professor Li Xiangdong, Professor Rogier Kremers, and my colleague Sorina. And as we discussed, China's presence in all three layers of the internet, telecommunications, standards, and applications is increasingly felt. And as was emphasized in this conversation, the country has become an exporter of innovation in the application layers as well. TikTok is one of the notable examples, but it's far from being the only one. And China is also enacting a wide range of digital legislation on data security, personal information protection, digital governance, and has recently relaxed its restrictions on data flows, which was quite interesting considering the international scenario of digital trade negotiations right now. So I would like to ask the speakers to reflect a little bit in this present trends, starting by Professor Li Xiangdong. Professor Li.
Yes. You're right. In the past 30 years, there are so many internet company get a lot of support of the capital, and then they have the technologies, have a good team, so they try to extend their business globally. And including such as you mentioned TikTok and the Tencent and NetEase, some internet company in China. So they try to bring their capital outside China and export their business model in other countries. So in some sense, some of them are very successful, including the e-commerce and instant message and also the social networks. But in recently, I think that's a big challenge for them. So because there is some kind of global policy conflict. Yeah, that even in Europe they have the GDPR and America have their policy, and China they have published their data security law and personal information protection law. So now there's some kind of conflict among those regulations. So that's a big challenge for China internet company to extend their business overseas. But the government try to encourage them to go abroad. So just like in 30 years ago, when China internet development, so the lack of money, lack of the talent, lack of the capital. So because the open policy just mentioned by German and also Madam Hu, the open policy was defined by the Deng Xiaoping. So this China sent a lot of people go abroad for study, and then when they get that degree and have their experience in America, they back to China, open the first round in the company in China. So now I think it's some right time for China to doing something for other countries. I'm not sure. I'm not mentioned is America and Europe because so many Chinese company go to South Asia to open their company to develop the internet for in these regions. So I think it's the past 30 years is they have very successful in domestic market and now try to extend the overseas market. But I think I'm not sure if they can be successful or not because there's the big issue for TikTok in American. So they challenge the relationship between TikTok with China. They worry about the data security if they can transfer the data from American to China and what's the relationship between those countries with the Chinese government. There's a lot of worry about the data security issues. So I think now is a challenge. And the company need to work together with the Chinese government and also the local government together to find some kind of possible solution to solve those issues. Otherwise, they will fail. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Professor Lee. And I like how you mentioned this need for collaboration, even among non-governmental actors, which were most of all the ones to develop the internet in its early days. And I just finalized my thesis in a topic related to China, the securitization of information and communication technologies and services in this bilateral relation. And I could see how the private sector in both countries wants to foster collaboration, and it's not really fueling the disputes, but is trying to make sure that relations remain stable, predictable. So that was a very interesting comment from my perspective. Professor Rohier, perhaps I will call you now to share your reflections. How do you see the current landscape today?
Thank you so much, Marilia. Thank you for the invitation. And thank you to the Diplo Foundation and the Fuxi Institution for sponsoring this very interesting colloquium. I have very pleasant experience working together with the good people at Fuxi, amongst others, in their participation in the Wujin World Internet Conference. And that is also always a pleasure. What I would like to reflect a little bit about is the nature of change. And I think, it is a wonderful anniversary and a wonderful occasion and a wonderful opportunity, 30 years tomorrow, of the internet in China, to think a little bit about what it means. And certainly for me, it means a lot. If the internet didn't exist, I wouldn't have a job. And indeed, very many people in this room wouldn't have a job either. But also when we think about the evolution of the internet from a very basic communications technology, I remember when my home first got connected to the internet, that took a lot of noise and strange sort of interactions with our telephone line. And then the connection was so slow that just downloading a single picture was an absolute nightmare. Whereas now we are all almost as if we were in the same room discussing the internet through the internet. That also means that the internet and digital technology more broadly has come to occupy a fundamental and central position in our social life, in our economic life, and in our political life. And that means, in turn, something very important. There is a famous document from around the early days of the internet, the Declaration of Independence of Cyberspace, which claimed that cyberspace was a completely new area for human activity in which governments had very little of a role to play. And much of the professional and commercial ethic that emerged around the internet was very much based on those libertarian notions. Now, what we see in the meantime is that governments around the world have decided that no longer in a situation where governments, and certainly in the West, by and large, believe that you cannot, but also you shouldn't regulate online processes, to a situation where nearly every important aspect of the digital world is becoming subject to scrutiny. And in some cases, that is for reasons that I think very many people can get behind, both in China and in Europe, for instance. A lot of our anti-monopoly law, our competition protection law, and our personal information protection related legislation serves to protect individual users, serves to protect the functioning of markets within that environment. But more broadly, we also see that questions of security, and not just cyber security in the narrow sense, as in security from hacks, attacks, and other forms of unauthorized intrusion, but also broader questions surrounding economic security, information security, ideological security, have come to the forefront of the discussion. And to a very significant degree, that is because the digital is now everywhere. And I fully predict that maybe in another 5 years or so, we're not really going to talk anymore about the digital as a separate category, in the sense that the digital economy will by and large be the economy. Our digital strategy will be our strategy, and our digital security will be our security. Now, when you get that sort of integration of the digital with nearly all important aspects of human life, you then get a process that we're seeing now, which I sometimes refer to as normalization, where we no longer treat the digital sphere as that completely space for human activity, as John Perry Barlow discussed, but we treat the digital sphere as if it were normal. So that can happen at a very micro level, for instance, about discussions about whether Uber drivers and Didi drivers are employees and so are subject to all the other employment protections that the law institutes, or whether tech is something special. We also, for instance, see it with energy, right? Where a lot of the discussion around new and strategic forms of energy generation closely connected to the digital sphere are being normalized in the sense that what once was the geopolitics of oil may now well become the geopolitics of batteries and semiconductors. And we see countries reorganizing their actions around access to these strategic resources. We see the internet being ever more seen as another source of risk, with the added problem that the internet is always on, and so the contact surface, and therefore the possible target surface, but also the possible surface of irritation between major players worldwide, is constantly there. And us as thinkers, experts, specialists, governments, businesses, in a way, we've only just started of discovery on exactly what this transformation will need to organize and operate our states, the way that our companies work, the way that we haven't just shaped the internet, but the internet is shaping and reshaping us. And to conclude, I would like to share a thought from an American colleague of mine, Jay Healy, who at our conference last year said, "It has taken societies about 400 years to digest the introduction of movable type printing and the information revolution that caused in Renaissance Europe. With the internet, we're only 30 years along. So we can only imagine how much time we still have to go and how much interesting matters await our further discovery and exploration. I very much look forward to doing that with a lot of people, many of which are in this room. And thank you again for your invitation."
Thank you very much, Professor Rohier. You did manage to capture really well the nature of the changes that we see today, especially this idea of the internet from a space of freedom to a space of risk and this security twist that we are seeing in many discussions that we have in the digital scenario, including economic security, which in the base was to guarantee access to the resources necessary to the growth of the population of our companies. And it has become pretty much about security of states, which frame things in a very confrontational way, I'm afraid. Let me move to my colleague, Sorina Teleano, who developed an excellent research some years ago on the participation of China in standardization processes. Sorina, over to you, perhaps for you to tell us a little bit about the findings of that research, which became a real reference in this area. Sorina.
Thank you, Marilia. Good morning, good afternoon to everyone. Yes, I'll take a few steps back and go to the very first part of your question about goals and priorities and look a bit at technical standards, because we do talk a lot about policy and regulation and whatnot these days around digital issues. But we tend to forget about the more technical side of things, and technical standards do have a role to play there. And at Diplo, we like to think of standards as some sort of a bridge between technology and policy. And we do encourage diplomats here in Geneva and elsewhere to pay a bit more attention to the technical side of things again. So going back to the original questions and what are some of the priorities and goals of China when it comes to technical standardization, and how are these reflected at an international level? There were a few points mentioned earlier about how over the past 2 decades, China has been focusing on becoming and now being, I guess, a global tech power, an innovation-driven economy capable of developing and exporting high-end technology. This also came with a growing attention to tech standards. So China does see standard as a key element in driving this kind of innovation, industrial development, and also economic growth, a key element in facilitating economic and trade exchanges, and obviously essential for China's growing competitiveness on the global market. So there are 3 main goals when it comes to the policy for international engagement and cooperation around technical standards. And we looked particularly at standards related to digital technologies, internet, artificial intelligence, quantum, and whatnot. So these 3 goals: active participation in international standardization processes, strengthen bilateral and multilateral standards cooperation, and some sort of harmonization between Chinese and international standards in 2 ways, both the so-called internationalization of Chinese standards and technology, and then the transposition of standards adopted at international level at a national level. I'll try to focus a little on the participation in international standardization processes. And there are these 3 key organizations here in Geneva: ITU with ITUT, and also with the standardization around radio communication at ITUR. ISO, the International Organization for Standardization, and IEC, the Electrotechnical Commission. And there are a few other international standard setting bodies elsewhere, like IETF, since we're talking about the internet now, the Internet Engineering Task Force. So what we've seen, starting from the late 1970s, when China started being more active again in international organizations. For some 20 years, there was a bit of this learning approach. Okay, we're going to be there, we're going to understand what others are doing and try to contribute. But since early 2000s, we have seen a shift and a new focus on actually contributing to standard development. And this is also something that has been mentioned earlier. So from learning and taking up standards that others have developed through actually being an active contributor to the shaping and development of these standards. And looking at some of the policy documents that have been adopted over the years, also around standardization, there is this overall goal of having a more active participation in international standardizations, again, with a focus on these 3 main entities, ITU, ISO, and IEC. And if we have time later on, we can explain a bit why there is a focus not only from China, but also from other actors around the world on these 3 main organizations. I was looking this morning at the statistics from the IETF, again, the International Internet Engineering Task Force. I think it's no surprise for anyone that for a long time, most of the contributions to IETF came from the US. That's where the internet initially was developed. But interestingly, over the past 10 years, we've seen quite an interesting shift there. And now there is some sort of similar amount of contributions from the US, from China, and from the EU. It's really interesting to look at this graph, how it has been changing over the years. It shows not only that China and the EU have increased participation, but also that participation and engagement from the US itself has dropped a bit. So also something to keep in mind when we look at some more active engagement from actors. What does it mean in the context of lower participation from other actors? So what is this growing focus on international standardization about? It's about coming up with more standard proposals, about trying to take the so-called leadership position, be it secretariat of a study group or a rapporteur for a specific work item. We have also seen quite a lot of mirroring of technical committees at a national level, the international technical committees. And what I do like in some way is this focus on encouraging and supporting participation of national actors to be involved in international standardization. And I was just coming across this morning on this policy, which is called Special Action Plan for Standardization Talent Development. So basically also supporting the development of capacities to be more active in international and also national standardization, which I think could also be something that other countries might be looking into, including in the context of a stronger engagement in international standardization. And my final point on the priorities for international standard setting. Again, this morning I was trying to read some of the most recent documents, and I came across these key points for national standardization work in 2024, which has an entire section about international engagement. And digital economy and contribution to the development of standards around the digital economy is there high among the priority. And it's no surprise that we're seeing quite a lot of engagement in the development around standards for artificial intelligence, for quantum, for biotech, and for these kind of technologies where standardization is still in the early stages. So China is trying to have a more strong voice there. I'll stop here and maybe we can have questions and answers later on. Thank you, Marilia.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Sorina. As I mentioned, it was a really in-depth study that I recommend we take a look to discuss standardization in general, not only the participation of China. And there are more and more researchers who are deciding to work with standards. I think it was an area that was seen as too technical in the beginning, but we see that standards also have repercussions, not only in the economy, but also in other areas of digital policy, in rights, for example. I would recommend that as well, a very good study by Dr. Kat Speth. She did an ethnographic study of IETF and the practices of participation there. And it was an amazing study that she conducted for 2-3 years of participating in meetings. I think I am going to change a little bit the dynamics and turn perhaps to Sonia at this moment, because I have seen that there has been some action in the chat. And just mindful of time to make sure that we have time to reflect on the questions, perhaps Sonia could read a few questions, summarize, not read them, but summarize them for us. And then when I turn back to you for the third block, if you can already reflect on some of these questions if you wish, to make sure that we will cover them. So Sonia, if you're ready, can you please come in?
Can you hear me right now?
Yes.
Yes. Okay, so there was quite a bit of discussion about the very, very first online connection, the first internet connection in China, and it's been applied in detail. And it seems like the first internet connection is the NCFC connection by Chinese Academy of Sciences in 1994, but probably the first dial-up connection ever would be around 1989. For more details, you can look at the chat for anyone who's interested. And then we had quite a few other interesting questions around China's approach to internet regulation and its evolution throughout the last few decades, and the implications of China's internet governance model to safeguard the flow of ideas, creativity, and innovation. And another good question was, what's the role of the Great Firewall in shaping the online experience for Chinese citizens and businesses? So these are the questions that stood towards us.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Sonia. If we have time at the end, I will collect a few more. Now we have a third part of our discussion in which we will look a little bit at the future. And the title of this part of the discussion was meaningfully from interdependence to independence. What are the future opportunities and challenges? It was interesting to see that a few years ago, the UN Secretary General Panel on Digital Cooperation launched a report that was titled The Age of Digital Interdependence. And the content is still very relevant, of course, but if we look at the title, perhaps it feels a little bit outdated today for the trends that we are discussing in terms of fragmentation of regulation, and also the trends that the WTO itself has identified in terms of the value chains being reshaped in order to foster more robustness, resilience, ideas such as friendshoring, for instance, coming to play, and the tension that has been rising around platforms and so on. So some questions that I would like to mention to you, and perhaps I will mention them one by one, and whoever wants can come in and react. Let's do it more like a free flow conversation. The first question was about the Sino-American relation and how different countries, but not just US and China, but we see that in the European Union as well, in the economic security strategy, they're putting a lot of emphasis on critical and emerging technologies and seeing it from a security perspective. And that includes, of course, artificial intelligence. If you could perhaps share some thoughts or reactions on how this impacts the governance of artificial intelligence in the future, in your perspective. Over to you, whoever wants to come in.
Okay, I could be the first one.
Okay, I'll be second.
Okay, so at the beginning, when we have a new emerging technology, everyone wanted to grab opportunity to be the first one, to be the super powerful one. It's a natural, not just roll the best students in the classroom, but also in the global arena for the international community. I understand, but you cannot take that position all the time. So when the market is expanding, you have to share your emerging technology with your partners, and that will spread and will balance such of the power. So at the beginning, we have a pioneers, and then we have different groups, and then we have big market, so that the international community have to stay together to enjoy the beauty that the emerging technology may bring to the global community. I'm quite optimistic to the future of such a competition. When we come to say that it's the same that we have a competition between United States and China, sometimes Europe and the United States, it's natural, but it's good because we have different choices so that we may test different solutions with competition. We are not the God. We don't have crystal ball. So we need to let the different things, the different solutions to happen, and then we could compare. It is not the option A, not option B. It is a combination of different options. So this is like the evolving of the natural environment. We need to let it happen naturally, but definitely we also need to take the cost. I will stop here.
Thank you, Professor Liu Hao. Who wants to come into this question?
Yeah, I just want to give my consideration on this topic. If you look at its future, of course, that the AI, the AIGC is a hot topic for competition among those countries, especially for China and US. Not only a competition for the chips, but also for the data. So I think if we look at in the future, I don't think that China is a competitor from American because, we have lack of the chips and lack of the data, and in some sense, we lack of the computing powers. So in the past 30 years, what we have learned from the internet development in China is we try to use the new technologies maybe developed by other countries and merge into the Chinese market to build a new business model to earn money. But of course, now we have more technologies and more talent. But compared to other countries, we are still not the real competitor, even for the AI in the next 5 to 10 years. So if we just go to the Silicon Valley in last November to have a lot of discussion with the entrepreneurs and investors, I think that maybe China is just behind American 2 or 3 years. 2 or 3 years is a very long history for this industry. 1.5 year is one generation, maybe 2 or 3 years is 2 generations for the technology. I think it's terrible for China, but yes, I think it's a reality. So for China, I do believe that in the future, in the next 10 years, China need to be much more open than before, how to copy the model for the past 30 years, how to attract more capital, more talent, and more technology into Chinese market, and to try to use the AI technology. Of course, I would encourage the entrepreneurs to try to invest a lot for the research. As Serena mentioned that for the technical standard, in the past 30 years, there are only less than 4% of the internet standard was made by Chinese people, maybe only 3%. The first RFC was published by Tsinghua University, and I contributed for the second and third one. But up now, there are only about 300 or less than 400 standard was made by Chinese people. It's very, very, very little. And especially for the AI governance and AI standard, I think it's also a big challenge for Chinese community. So I think we need to look at the reality, and also China itself try to fund the reality, try to come down and to do more works on itself, and how to use the new technologies and raise the open policy.
Thank you, Professor Li. It seems to me from what you said, and Professor Liu Hao mentioned as well, that the way forward is to develop technology, and to develop these critical technologies, we need somehow to reinforce interdependence, because we will need access to technology, we will need access to capital, and that means perhaps more than less globalization. But at the same time, we are discussing from a broader perspective, not only technology, deglobalization and trends. And one of the latest reports from the WTO actually calls for reglobalization of international trade, and identifies that any bottlenecks that we have that have been identified since COVID in terms of value chains should be tackled by having more robust, diversified, and more trades with more partners rather than less partners. So how do you think, and that's a question that I will perhaps forward to you, how to counter any fragmentation trends that we see in the digital economy today and reinforce this interdependence that you're talking about? Let's perhaps try to be a little bit more practical in terms of what would be the mechanisms, what would be the ways of cooperation among countries that we should perhaps explore from now on, if we want all to develop these technologies that will be necessary for our digital economies together. And again, I open to anyone who wants to react.
If I try to give some reaction for your questions, I think the WTO want to emphasize the globalization of the international trade. So the key point is how to make sure we can have the global data flow around the world. So, but now if we compare to the traditional international trade policy, so every country try to encourage the international trade. But now there is a big challenge, because maybe people is lack of knowledge to know what the real data is. But now there's so many limitation for data flow. So in China we have some kind of policy to ask the enterprise to store the data domestically, and also America have the similar kind of policy, and even in Europe. If we cannot to have the global data flow, how we can have the globalized international trade? because everything is relevant to data. In some sense, data is relevant to everything. So the currently, if we want to have the real and re-globalization, so how to make sure we can have an interoperable data security or data governance policy, try to make sure, with respect to the country security issues, but we need to encourage the data interoperability globally. That's very important, both in policy layer, but also in technology traffic layer.
Absolutely. Jovan, please go ahead.
Oh, yeah, I was just disconnected for a few minutes. My lithium supply was very low, and got disconnection. I think the one question is that old narrative that internet by its nature is interdependent is dying. And it's dying for the reason that I think eloquently was explained by Professor Roger, that we have now real interests which are in the internet world. Now, the key issue is, can governments make an informed decision if they are benefiting more from interdependence or independence? That's the key issue when it comes to infrastructure, economic development, to the maybe trivial issues that grandma somewhere in the Balkans in Africa is connected to grandchildren somewhere in the United States or Europe, or big 80 million plus Chinese diaspora community. There are on all levels these dilemmas between internet, but they come with informed decision. And I think the previous narrative that internet by its nature, it's interconnected and it will bypass everything, it is dying, obviously. But we have now to make new social contract and say, yes, we want to be interdependent and we will support it legally, politically, and we will be fair, and there will be sort of global rules of the game. One friend of mine, when I told him about the event, he asked me one interesting question. He said, there is a TikTok in China. What about similar service in US? What about similar services in China? Which is a legitimate question. And that probably will have to be, those issues have to be addressed with utmost clarity, with utmost understanding what are the priorities and interests for countries. Therefore, that would be for me the great development, that we come to the clarity of discussion and reduce any sort of noise around it, like a noise that for a long time that internet is by its own technical facility bypassing our barriers. Yes, it could help, but it is basically part of human decisions to use it or not to use it. That would be my take on it. More clarity, more fair, more honest and open discussion, which are related to the concrete economic, social, and ultimately also geopolitical interests.
Thank you, Jovan, for these reflections. So Sonia called my attention that we have questions in the chat. So we have a few minutes left. I will invite her to forward these questions, and then I will ask remaining questions, and we can wrap up after that. So Sonia, please go ahead. And Sarina, there is a question on standardization in the chat. If you want to take a look, perhaps on your final remarks, you can take that one. So Sonia, please.
Yes. We've talked about the internet shaping us in return as we shape it. And the question was, this effect is mostly seen in language and in dichotomies. So, and human interaction is facilitated for technology increasingly. Is what's happening in English also happening in Chinese is the question. And would you like me to? I would also read the last ones out here. And what steps can be taken to promote greater transparency, inclusivity, and accountability in the process of developing and implementing digital standards on a global scale? And one last question was on how our other stakeholders and countries are engaging with China in digital standard setting processes and while influencing outcomes.
Thank you very much, Sonia. We had 2 questions left that I will throw. And again, if you take them, please it will be your concluding remarks as well. One is about the role of Europe. If you see in this conversation, we focus a lot on US and China, but the role of Europe in terms of a bridge, a builder, and region that has a lot of gravitas when it comes to regulation and in the digital sphere. And one last question about moving forward. What are the common policy goals that we could identify that are the same in China, in the West, that could perhaps present us with a positive way of win-win cooperation and collaboration that would foster more interdependence, more integration, and not contribute to fragmentation as we have been talking about. So perhaps, and please address any questions that Susonia also asked. Your final remarks if you want to step in on these ones.
Marilia, I can give it a try also because I have to run to another meeting quickly. On the last question you just raised, I was thinking about this very, very recent UNGA resolution on AI for sustainable development, which was quite impressive to look at how it started, as a US suggested draft resolution, and then it gained support from basically everyone within the UN, including China. And I think there are a few areas where we can all agree that we do have common goals. And this UNGA resolution is one example of that. Picking up on some of the questions in chat, how do geopolitical tensions and rivalries between China and other major powers impact discussions? They clearly do. And the case study also analyzed, Marilia, in your paper around the new IP and a few other discussions around facial recognition technologies. Those are a very clear reflection of how these geopolitical tensions have influenced more technical discussions. And I think we have both criticized some of these approaches. So we do encourage you to take a look at those more critical analysis of these two and a few other cases. And on your last point, I think one thing we tend to forget when we talk about international standardization is that these international standards are developed on the basis of consensus. And the major international standardization organizations do have very clear rules and procedures that no one is actually breaking, or at least we haven't found an example of a breaking of these rules. So this transparency and accountability, I think they do work. It's more of a matter of looking at who's there, who's not there, and then maybe not blaming who's there for what's happening because others are missing. I hope this makes sense, but giving the floor back to others. Thank you.
Thank you, Sorina. Perhaps Professor Rohir, would you like to react on these last comments and make your concluding remarks as well?
Well, only to say, being mindful of the time, that I think there's this really interesting we have these different sets of governance questions, right? When we go to standardization, what we try to do is solve engineering problems very often related to interoperability. For a very long time, that worked rather well and no one cared about it. But increasingly, what we see is also that standards have economic value, right? Standards reflect intellectual property that can be extremely valuable once it's deployed. And certainly for a country like China, gaining a greater share of that value is essential to its future growth strategy and its ambitions to continue to increase its prosperity. And so this is, I think, going to be the very interesting question. To what extent can we still say this is technical? Not really, because what we see is all of these things are becoming far more politicized as we start recognizing more and more, the second and third and fourth order effects of all of these technological process. I don't have the answer to all of these questions. If I did, my house would be a little bit bigger, but at least we know that we cannot simply think, everything is becoming politicized. We should just go back to the way things were because that we knew that and that was a lot more comfortable. I think we're going to have to live with this and find ways through, and that's going to be a lot more challenging, but I just don't see any other way.
Thank you very much. Professor Liu Hao, perhaps 30 seconds of your final remarks. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. For the international standard making, I couldn't agree more with Sorina. It's there, the rules is clear, it is accepted by the whole world. Don't need to change, just get engaged. Secondly, the problem was not caused by the technology, caused by the culture. and the politics, but the common goals for every government on this world is to serve the people. But it is the difference that serve the people in which country. But we need to serve the people around the world. If you change the goal, you know how to get engaged with the global community and try to find the interdependent solutions, not just try to segregate it from the world. And I read the questions on the chat. I know so many people have quite a lot of interest for China. Come to China, and also when we come to see each other in the world, I will share my experience. So don't feel shy to ask rows of hot questions. I'm ready to answer the question in the future.
Thank you very much, Professor Shandong Li.
Yeah, I think it's today because we discussed the history of China internet. I can give some remarks for the future. You know, in the first 2 or 3 decades for the global internet, China is absent in this community because China connected internet in 1994. But in the past 30 years, in the 3 decades, so China reached the biggest internet market. So the Chinese company earn a lot of money with the business model and recruit more talent, doing a lot of technical R&D. So now in the future, maybe 1 or 2 decades, they want to deliver their technology and want to contribute their technology to the global community. That means it will have more engagement for the standard processing. So I think that should be a good news because they will not only compete money, compete the model, and also compete the technologies. I think they need more collaboration with the global community, how to make sure their engagement is follow the rules and also do the real contribution for the internet development for the world.
Thank you very much. And I will call Jovan to close this discussion and say the final words.
Marilia, I was worried a few days ago when I read that Chinese and US scientists agreed that internet will destroy us during some meeting in Beijing. I disagreed with the team, but the good news is that Chinese and US scientists agreed about, in my view, wrong conclusion. That was the promising news. I think there is a need for more talk. There is a need for more respect for the other opinion, clarity and openness in discussion. Media does not help a lot. Media often simplifies the issues on us and them, my opinion and wrong opinion, and I don't think it's not healthy. But if we can foster this type of discussions as we had today and in other fora, I think it's a promising sign, and that is my conclusion for the future, not only of China, but of the rest of the world and the future internet developments.
Thank you very much, Jovan. Sorry, everybody, for going 2 minutes over time. And thank you very much for attending this discussion. Have a good celebration tomorrow to all our Chinese friends. And this video will be available, so you can review the discussion if you arrived in the middle of it. And thank you very much for your participation. See you again next time for other discussions. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.